Hi again, welcome to the second installment of these video reviews that I'm starting to do. Today we're going to talk about Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, which I mentioned in the last video. As many of you know, she has another book coming out after years and years of separation between the two books called Go Set a Watchman. Comes out on Tuesday, so it's kind of perfect timing to be talking about this book. I'm going to start today with a few of my favorite quotes. There's going to be three. I'm going to keep it brief, and we will go from there. So the first one I want to share kind of tells us why this book is called what it is. So Jim and Scout, who are two of our main characters that I'll explain a little bit more about in a minute, have just gotten air rifles and they're very, very excited. And their dad's giving them some guidance on how they're allowed to use them. This is on page 103. He says, Atticus said to Jim one day, "I'd rather you shoot at tin cans in the backyard, but I know you'll go after birds. Shoot all the blue jays you want if you can hit them, but remember, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." That was the only time I've ever heard Atticus say it was a sin to do something, and I asked Miss Maudie about it. "Your father's right," she said. "Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us. They don't eat at people's gardens, don't nest in corn cribs. They don't do one thing to sing but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." So it ties in a little bit later in the book. It really kind of brings home why that's the title of the book. But I'm not going to read that quote to you because it will give too much away. The next one is just something that Atticus says really often in the book that I just think is kind of a sweet thing for a dad to say. There's a lot of turmoil in this book around the Finch family. So the kids, Jim and Scout, get worried often for their dad. And he will always tell them, "It's not time to worry yet." He says that multiple times. I should have counted, but several times he says that in the book. And then I like this one more than anything just because it's kind of funny. So, as we'll talk about a little bit more later, this book is a lot about racial inequalities. It's set in the 1930s in Alabama, and but there's a lot of turmoil going on in the little town that they're from. So it's a lot about racial inequality, but then it talks about gender for just a brief second, and I think it's kind of funny that Atticus, who's so adamant about racial equality, says this about women. So they're talking about what if women could serve on a jury, because at the time they couldn't. And Atticus grinned and said, "I doubt if we'd ever get a complete case tried, the ladies be interrupting to ask questions." So, well, we can let the men do it, can't let the women do it, so I just think that's funny. And those are all the quotes I'll share. I'm definitely going to put more in because Harper Lee is just magnificent at writing, and there'll be more quotes to share. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the main characters. There's several that I could mention. I'll kind of keep it to the ones who are recurring. So first we have Scout Finch, who's our narrator. She's a young girl. She's the youngest of the Finch family, and she is just kind of a spitfire. She's just got a lot of spunk, and she's young, and she's kind of a tomboy, and her mom passed away when she was young, so she was raised by a dad and has a brother and doesn't have a lot of womanly influence in her life. But she's the one who tells our story. She tells it from her grown adult perspective of when she was young, and all of the events that go on in the story are unfolding. Then we have Jim, who's her older brother, who I think kind of takes one of the biggest transformations in the book, because it kind of starts out as this young boy. He's, I think, 9 when the book starts, and I think he's about 13 when it ends, or 12 or 13. And he, I think, as the events of the book unfold, he's the one who kind of has more of an understanding of what's going on, and he gains his own opinions. Even at such a young age, he kind of decides what he thinks about what's going on. Atticus Finch is the dad. He is a lawyer in Macomb, Alabama, which is a fictional town that Harper Lee created for the novel. And he kind of drives the conflict of the novel. He takes on this case. He defends a black man who's been accused of raping a white girl, and it just is what drives the entire novel. Then we have Dill, who is a young boy. He's in between Scout and Jim's age, and he comes and stays the summers, and he's engaged to Scout, even though they're like 7 and 8, and he's just fun and spunky, and he just is imaginative, and he's there for a lot of the important events as well. And then we have their neighbor, Boo Radley, who never comes out of his house. Most everybody's kind of scared of him. They don't know if he even still lives there, but he plays an important role because the kids are so curious about him and so scared and wondering what he's like and why he doesn't come out, and he plays a monumental part in what goes on. And then we have Tom Robinson, who is the black man that Atticus is defending against rape, and then Bob Ewell, who is the really the antagonist of the book. He's just a kind of white trash man who has no qualms about being white trash and just making everyone else's life miserable. There's a few other people, lots of little like fluffy characters of women, like Miss Maudie's important. She's one of the neighbors, and then one of their aunts comes and stays with them and kind of makes their life hard. And then there's Calpurnia, or Cal they call her, who is their cook that comes and kind of helps raise Scout and Jim, and she's important as well. So those are kind of the main characters of To Kill a Mockingbird, and they just kind of mesh really, really well. It's a really good cast of characters. Now we're going to talk about the plot. We spend a lot of time in the beginning of this book talking about their neighbor, Boo Radley. Scout and Jim are just fascinated with this man because they know there's all these stories and all these myths about why he never comes out of his house, and he's grown. I mean, he's a grown man who they never see comes out of his home. And they pester him, they go to their house and like stick fishing poles in the windows and try to give him notes, and they sneak in his backyard, and they just want to know all about Boo Radley. And you read about this for quite a while, kind of going, okay, so now we're going to talk about Boo Radley for the book because we spent all this time building up to that. But really, the big story of this novel is the case that Atticus takes on defending Tom Robinson, who is a black man who has been accused of raping Bob Ewell's daughter, who is a white girl. And Harper Lee just really sets the tone to be talking about racial inequality, and she does it in such a simple way. Like she just lays it out like, obviously this is not what needs to be going on, but it was what went on. This is what life was like in 1930 America, really, for the African American man or woman. And I think Scout really takes a turn, and she understands quite a bit of what goes on. But I think Jim, in my opinion, is where I got a lot of the perspectives that I kind of just went, yeah, you know, why would that be what anyone thought was okay ever? I mean, not that I didn't know that, but he just has this transformation of being a young boy who kind of doesn't understand the world to gaining his own opinion of what life is like in this little town that he lives in. So we spend a lot of time building up to the case and how the town is just in turmoil and just thinks Atticus Finch is just ruining his family. Atticus is a well-respected man. He's a good man. He kills them with kindness, and he takes all the persecution he gets. He turns the other cheek, and he helps his kids do the same. Scout's kind of ornery and wants to fight anybody who has something mean to say about her dad, but he tells her to just keep her head up and keep walking. So we spend a lot of time talking about this case and the outcome of this case, and then all of the events that follow are kind of when it ties into the beginning. That's when we realize why we need to care about Boo Radley and why we need to know that Scout and Jim don't really have a perspective of the world, because by the end of the book, they both really have kind of developed one. One of the interesting things that I would say to note it happens, I think, in Scout's class. It might have been Jim's, but I'm pretty sure it's Scout's. They do a current event assignment, and one of the boys in her class picks an article about Hitler and how he is planning to mistreat the Jews, and he wants to oppress them and all of this stuff, because this is just preceding World War II. And Scout notices that her teacher is so upset that how dare he think that he could oppress the Jews. They're just such great people and all of this. And Scout's kind of just going, okay, but we live in our little town, and every single day we do this to the African American people who live here. Why is it not okay for Hitler to do this to the Jews? And there's even a quote, something that says like, well, why would he want to do this? Aren't they white? Someone in the class says that. Like, well, you can't do it to someone who's white, duh. And you just kind of don't think like, well, yeah, in America we're sitting here acting like, how dare Hitler do that, when in all reality we were still really struggling with some inequalities ourselves. So now comes my favorite part. I think I've already told you this, but should you read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee before you die? 100% absolutely yes. I'd have to say this is in my top 3 favorite books. The first time I read this was when I was a sophomore in high school, and I loved it then, and I never touched it again. I just like, oh, I like To Kill a Mockingbird. If someone asked me, I would just say, yeah, I do. But honestly, I did not remember what this book was about. I didn't remember like how deeply it delves into the human condition at the time that it's set. And Harper Lee she just balances so well. After having read the book last week where I talked about how there was no dialogue and it was just all of this storytelling and all of this description, you kind of have to make your own assumptions, which was okay. I liked it. But after having read Harper Lee's book this week, she's just such a masterful writer. She just knows how to balance everything that she tells you. She's got lots of little tangents that she takes, which normally honestly bother me. I don't like when a book just is all over the place. But there are lots of little smaller stories within the bigger story that you actually care about. Like Jim reads to an older woman for a long time, but the moral of why he did that ties in so well to what she's trying to tell you with the whole book, that you don't care that you spend all this time reading about something that doesn't have a lot to do with the main plot. So yes, absolutely read it and reread it and learn everything you can from it, because it is just that good. And I am going to read the next book that comes out on Tuesday that she wrote after years and years, and I would suggest that you do too. Thank you again for watching. I'm so glad that you came back, and I'll see you next week. So stuttering through this. Yeah, you already started. Okay, I'm not gonna say that. Or, well, actually, I'm not saying this right. Stop looking at me. It's like making me so nervous to have you looking at me. That is all I have.